You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network. And I'm thrilled today to have my friend Ira Antoine with me. We connected last year. He works with Texas Baptist, and we'll learn all about that in a minute. But we specifically connected over serving rural churches and multicultural churches, and just had a great time together. We actually went and recorded a video together, and it was so cold where we recorded it, I almost got hypothermia, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
And I want everyone who's watching the YouTube version, the video, knows that Ira actually is celebrating Valentine's Day with me. And he wore his red shirt.
What a friend.
What a friend. So Ira, how you doing, man? Thank you for joining me on Valentine's.
I'm good, Dale. Thank you for having me, man. You're a dear friend, and so I appreciate what that you do. And only for you and maybe two other people.
Well, good. I feel so privileged. Well, you and I just feel like the first time that we got on a phone call or however it was, I think we connected to John Sanders, but I'm not sure. But there was this heartfelt connection. And then I got to spend 3 days with you as we recorded some videos last year, and just hearing your heart, and you got so much wisdom, I'm just so thankful that I get to connect with a guy like you. And so we're going to talk specifically today somewhat about multicultural ministry and also rural church ministry, because that's kind of what your vibe is. But before we do all that, just kind of tell us who you are. Let's get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, well, thanks again. I'm Ira Antoine, and I have the privilege of serving as the director for Bi-Vocational Pastors Ministry for Texas Baptist. Texas Baptist is a state convention of 5,300 churches throughout Texas. And I would say roughly 60% of those are led by bivocational pastors of different, ethnicities. Of course, many of them are small membership churches. Mm-hmm. And I also have the pleasure of serving as the pastor of the Minnehaha Church, Baptist Church, in Goliad, Texas. I live in Houston, mm-hmm. and the church is in Goliad. So it's an old, when I say old church, it was founded in 1870. So we're 152-3 years old, something like that. So I'm excited to serve as the pastor, the 20th pastor of that particular congregation. So I'm just excited about being here, Dale, and just want to hear, and let's talk a little bit about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, tell us about growing up. What was it like for you, and when did you come to faith? What's your background in that arena?
Yeah, great question. So, interestingly, I'm a native of Louisiana, as you can tell by the Antoine. That's mm-hmm. French. And I grew up in what I would call a house or home that knew God, and we recognize that, but I didn't grow up in a Christian home. Mm-hmm. And I came to faith when I was 19 years old. I was in college. Just had a moment there, and God arrested my heart. I remember my conversion day, January 1st, 1985, Atlanta, Georgia. Mm-hmm. I knew, and I was at a conference. I was at a church conference because mm-hmm. I was in the gospel choir, and they didn't ask me my Christianity. They didn't want to see my membership card into glory. They just said, "Can you sing?"
Can you sing?
And we did it. Mm-hmm. And so, growing up there, and then I connected with a local Baptist church there, and was discipled by 3 awesome men who I thank God helped disciple me through my in my college years, and then I had the privilege of leading 3 of my family members to the Lord, my household, really, my mom, my brother, and then my dad several years, almost a decade later, was able to lead them to the Lord. And so I thank God for that privilege. So
Tell
But
me
then,
about your mentors, man. Well, because you're one of the few people I've ever had on the podcast, and then we're getting close to doing 200th one, who said, "Yeah, I got saved and had these great mentors." What was that like?
it was awesome, man, because so I was a college student, and so it was a local church there,
Mhm.
the Progressive Baptist Church, and they would send the church bus to pick up students to come to church. A great ministry, right? And then when I came to the Lord, there was three men, one of which I still stay in contact with, um, Leo Bolden, Carl Lateague, and Clark Joseph. And those men, Brother Leo would he'd pick me up, or he'd say, "Hey, young man, um, I'm gonna look for you on Sunday. I'm gonna look for you on Wednesday, midweek services." And then we did men's ministry together. We would sit. I never. I mean, it's like yesterday. And I've been a believer over 39 years now. But I remember sitting there on a little porch. The church had a little building that they used for a food pantry and a distribution center. And I remember he and I sitting there, he and I and Carla T, and they just poured into me and sharing. And then,
Wow.
that was before the days of cell phones and pagers
Mhm.
and all that kind of stuff. So they'd call or checking on me and just kind of walking me through and just help me and just kind of navigate through that. And I tell you, that was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. And um, I thank God for them. Every time I go somewhere throughout this globe, I remember those guys, and it's because of them, because they poured into me. For 2 years they poured into me, and then I graduated, and I left out. But I stayed in contact with them marginally. But then this last one, Clark, he and I, are Facebook and social media friends and stuff like
Sure.
that.
So were they ministers or were they lay people?
They were lay leaders. They were lay
That's
leaders,
amazing.
and yes, and Clark. So Clark was the choir director
Mhm.
for the university's gospel choir,
Mhm.
and he also was a musician for the church choir that I attended. So those connections stayed really strong. But no, they were lay leaders. They weren't pastors. They weren't ministers or anything like that. Matter of fact, none of them were deacons at
Mhm.
that point. They one of them is a deacon now, but they weren't deacons. They were just laymen that just said, "Hey, I see a young man. I want to pour into him," and that was the best thing. One of the best things that happened in my life.
It's so shaped who you are. Do you know, did they have other folks that they were pouring into as well, or were you just kind of soloed out?
You know what? I don't know. I would imagine they did. That's the kind of guys that they are.
Mhm.
But we never had any kind of small group
Mhm.
gatherings or anything like that. So I don't know any. I couldn't go back and say, "Oh, and they did this person and that person." And truthfully, dear, I was just excited the fact that they picked me. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's I because I'm looking at this kind of the way we read the Bible from here, looking back at your life and knowing what you do now, and the impact you have in hundreds of churches all across Texas and other places as well. And I think, wow, I would love to. I'd love to interview you with them to find out why they chose to help you, what the deal was, because they shaped you. And every time, honestly, every time you touch somebody's life, every time you help a church that gets healthy and they reach people for Jesus, those men have a part in it.
I would agree with that. I would agree. I totally agree. Yes, yes, I totally agree.
And see, that is, in my mind, that is what discipleship has always supposed to have been about. Not about
Mhm.
just having classes where we read. And again, I'm not anti-education, but I think we've missed the relational side of it a lot. And just seeing you, and I didn't know what you just told me till now, and I'm sitting there going, "Wow, look at the man!" When they get when you get to glory, and I'm assuming they're going to get there before you do. That
Yeah.
I'd like to be with you when we look them up just to go shake their hand and kind of
Yeah,
find out,
yeah,
okay,
that's some great guys, man. Yeah.
so here's these guys, they disciple you, you finish up school. What happens next? You go on to Christian college or seminary? What
No,
did you do?
so my undergrad degree is in engineering. So mechanical engineering in particular. So I left Louisiana and I came to Houston and I started working with one of the contractors at NASA, a
Okay,
NASA
cool.
contractor. So I had the privilege of working on some early phases and working on some teams, not personally, but
Mhm.
as a part of a team there. And just I sensed a call into ministry before I left college.
Mhm.
So I knew that God had a call on my life, but I also knew that God had called as far as vocational ministry, but I also knew He had a call on my life in engineering and working in the field that I was working in. So I came to Texas and started working as a contractor engineer there. I did that for 8 years. And in the midst of that, in the midst of those first 4 years, I sensed this call to go to seminary. So I started working on a master's degree at Southwestern, and I worked that process. And then God did this. I want to call it this odd thing, and it's not really odd; it's odd to me. I never shall forget one day in my quiet time, one morning, my devotion time, and when I think about it again, it's vividly like I can remember it like I remembered breakfast this morning. Okay, He says, "I want you to leave your work at NASA, and I want you to go and be on staff at a local church plant." And I thought,
and you're like, is anybody else up there?
right? And and I was by myself in quiet time, right? And I said, Lord, I want to do whatever Gideon things, Dale. I want to throw that fleece out, because I'm like, and when my wife wakes up, I need to share that with her. So we need to, and I just said, okay, God, if you've not led me wrong thus far. So I shared it with Cynthia, my wife, and it resonated with her heart and her spirit, and we made some plans. God opened some doors, and I went to talk to the pastor, and I said, hey man, this is what God is leading me to do, and this is the kind of income that I would need in order to do this. There were some concessions. I mean, I didn't get all of the things that I had before, but this is what I needed. And he said, okay. He prayed about it, and he said, man, let's do it. And it was a wrap. So I never shall forget that day, my last day working there. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time just to see what was behind me. And then when I turned in my badge and all my credentials at the security gate, it was done. I was done.
No turning back now.
No turning back. Yeah, that's it. It was a wrap. And so I've done that, and I've worked. I was the pastor of pastoral care, is what I came on as. And I served under this pastor, and I did work, with the congregation, and God allowed that to happen. And I was in the process, and also still working on my master's degree at Southwestern. So I was doing all that, and God's hand was definitely upon us, and His favor was on us. So I appreciate Him for that.
Tell us about Cynthia.
Man, this lady, she's a godsend. That's all I can say. She's a godsend. It was here's a funny story.
And it is Valentine's, so this is appropriate.
Right. So again, I was in the choir, and we met through a mutual friend of mine. Okay. And she tells the story this way. She goes, yeah, I saw him in the choir, and I thought, oh, he has such pretty eyes, or something like that. And so we joked about that. And they said, who, him? And they said, yeah, you want to meet him? And so forth and so on. Cynthia had already graduated college at this point. And we our mutual friend gave Cynthia my phone number, and we connected, man. And we went out on one date, and okay, let's see what's going to happen. But here's what sealed the deal. I'm a college student, right? And so she calls one evening and says, hey, have you had dinner? Well, of course I had some dinner. She says, listen, I have some leftover broccoli casserole. I made too much. Would you like some? I got just some leftover. I said, sure. What college kid is gonna deny a home cooked meal?
Anything right? Home cooked, baby.
Anything home cooked.
We're in, man.
So Dale, she brings this large pan. It's huge. And I'm thinking, this is the leftover. And one in my dorm manager, the the RA who was responsible for the whole dorm, he was the only one who had a stove, and that's dating myself now. He's the only one who had a place where you can warm up. So his name is Kim, and him and I are eating, and he looks at me and he says, Antoine, I don't know who this woman is, but if you let her go, you'll be a darn fool, dude. And so this year we get the privilege of celebrating 35 years of marriage.
That's awesome.
And so I'm thankful unto the Lord for her. She's definitely my helpmeet, and she helps keep that balance. We help balance each other. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate her and her ministry.
Yeah, her ministry of meals.
And her ministry is to help me to see things, to see, we all have these blind spots, right? Mm-hmm. She'll help me see those blind spots, and she'll lovingly say, hey, just watch. And she's very, very kind, and she gives a whole lot. So I'm
very hard for us to have anyone in our life that we'll receive from. I talked about in my book, I talked about blind spots a little bit. And I said, the thing about blind spots is what's obvious to everyone else is oblivious to us. And honestly, most of us, but pastors especially, and in fact, I'll ask you to speak to this. I find that most pastors are very guarded and really don't want to be called out. And it's not because they think they're beyond having problems or things to work through. I think it's because we feel like we fail God every time that we're not perfect. What have you seen?
Yeah, I think we do have those blind spots, and we are guarded. And I think the guarding is because somewhere along the line, Dale, someone told us we had to be perfect, and we could never have a misstep. Mm-hmm. And the reality of it is that if you look throughout Scripture, you'll see those who did mighty deeds for the Lord. It's not a justification, but this is a reality. They had some missteps. Moses had missteps. Abraham had missteps. Everyone had missteps, but God didn't throw them away. But I don't know when it happened, and what century or what confessional book that was written that said, "Thou shalt be perfect." And so we end up being guarded. And I think that diminishes our ability to work with others, because then they think, I got to be like him. And if I do make a misstep, then everything is gone, right? And it's such a burden, man. It's such a burden to live like that. And I decided several years ago, probably about 8 to 7 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago, that look, I'm gonna just like y'all here's who I am. I'm not perfect. And if you're looking for the perfect one, then let's just go ahead and have this vote now, and I can move on, because I'm not that one. But I'm not using it as an excuse.
No.
But you're right. I can just see those, but that does have me guarded. I got to be careful where I go and what I say and how I do. And not that I want to do anything wrong, but it's just so guarded. You just yeah. And people can be cruel. People can be cruel.
Oh, they're horrible sometimes. Was there an event that took place, or how did you get to that revelation? Because how old are you today?
I'm 57 today.
All right, so you're 57. I'm 60. So, I think you said about 10 years ago, whatever. And that's about the same time that I kind of got that same revelation, but mine came through a lot of pain and physical issues and stuff like that. What went off in you, if I can say it that way, or what was the revelation that brought you to the point to where you finally had to confess to everybody, I'm not perfect and I can't live up to that standard? Was there an event, or was it just a revelation?
I think it was a mixture of both. It's just knowing that heavy burden that I had, right? That hard burden. And then another event that happened, something happened. So one of my daughters got pregnant out of wedlock. And she was hurt and shamed.
Are you a lead pastor at this time?
Yes.
Okay, so you're lead pastor, and your daughter gets pregnant out of wedlock. All right.
Get her pregnant out of wedlock. So she's ashamed to tell me, like, but I know. I mean, I can tell, I can sense. And so I never forget. So she put it off, telling me, and she ended up telling me on the phone one day. Okay, I was traveling. I was at Southern Seminary doing some stuff, and and we had a conversation. And she said to me, she says, I was afraid to tell you because I didn't want to disappoint you
Mm.
and I didn't want to hurt your ministry.
Mm. What a burden for her to carry.
And I'm starting to tear up when I think about that, because I then remembered the scripture says that perfect love casts out all fear.
Mm-hmm.
So then I began to say, well, maybe I don't have that perfect love that I keep telling that I have.
Mm.
And it was at that point that I stood and acknowledged and just say, listen, and I didn't make a public spectacle of her. I didn't make her confess before I didn't do none of that kind of stuff.
Mm-mm.
I lovingly walked with her and hung out with her, and I defended her, and I said, listen, all of us do things. And I said, now, things that she's done, you only know that she's done it because she's pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that we do, you know. And I said, you know what? Hey, y'all, that's not me. I don't. So if I'm not a 1 Timothy 3 guy because of this,
Mm-hmm.
then I think you're going to eliminate about 80% of the
Oh, I'm
pastors out
so
there.
glad you went there. You
You
know,
know,
when First Timothy talks about, raising their home well, it
yeah,
doesn't mean that you raise perfect people. As you mentioned, the Bible doesn't have but one perfect person, and we killed him.
one.
So,
Yes,
so that's humanity. But
yeah,
but raising your family well is for your kids to grow up and still love God, even though they went through stuff and lived life.
absolutely.
And I made a decision. I think the greatest decision I ever made in ministry, long before we had children. And I just made this statement. I said, when we have kids, and even in our marriage, I'm always going to put my family above the ministry.
Right.
That was not modeled for me.
I got
Everybody that I had seen growing up did the opposite. We actually had an evangelist come to our church one point and said that, when you think of priorities of life, it's God first, then your ministry, then your family.
you.
And I'm going, I'm a teenager, and I'm going, Ira, that doesn't sound right. I'm not quite sure why it doesn't sound right. And then I've watched so many people over the years, not counting what's happening in the last 10 years,
Right.
lose their family because, they're trying to save other people's families. And I
Yes.
actually heard that, and I did not hear this personally, but one of my friends told me that, when he was in seminary, his professor said, look, dude, if you'll take care of God's family, he'll take care of your family. And that's just hogwash.
Crazy.
Just hogwash. But
It's
we bought
crazy.
that, and I'm like you. I'd like to know, where did that transition happen to where all of a sudden we felt like we had to be perfect, and we had to live a perfect life. Because I wrote a book about the fact you can't do it.
It's impossible.
I ended up having heart surgery because of it. Let's do this. I want to take a quick break, and then after we
Sure.
take the break, I want to come back and I want to talk about what you're doing today. I would really love to hang in just where we were for the rest of the time, but I really want to cover your ministry as well. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Sure.
Back here with Ira, and we're just talking through his life, and we're both kind of stirred up now because we've been talking about our family. See, I had 3 daughters, so I get it, man. And I'm going to say this, and then we're going to move on. So when the church that hired me, when I pastored a small church, I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast, but when they hired me, I knew I'd never been a lead pastor, but I knew I've been in ministry. And so this church of 30 had just split. And so when they asked me to come be their pastor, I did the trial sermon. I always think that's funny. We call it that. And so I sit down with the board, and there's 4 board members of this church of 30. And they look at me and they say, we want you to come be our pastor. And I knew the atmosphere that we were going into, and it was going to be rough, And so I said, okay, well, before you hire me, let me establish something with you. I said, I recognize that when you hire a pastor, that his family lives in a fishbowl. And I get that. I said, and so I want you to understand, you guys can do anything you want to me. I get that. But I want you to know my family's off limits.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and my 3 daughters are my wife and my 3 daughters. My wife is not the ladies minister. She's not going to run the nursery. She will serve in the areas she feels like she's gifted in. And I said, but I want you to know the first person, and I said it like this, and you'll think, Dale, you an idiot. I said, the first person in this little dinky church that messes with my wife or kids will discover a side of me that none of you know exists.
Wow.
They're off limits. And Ira, I shared that with the board, and they kind of sat back and looked at me, but they said, well, we want you to come. And then about once a year, I'd get up and share that with the congregation. And I just said, listen, nobody's done anything. Nobody's said anything. My family's off limits. One of the coolest things that's happened to me is my oldest daughter, Tiffany, works at the Unstuck group. And a few years ago, Tony asked them, the PKs, at Christmas time to write a family memory.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my daughter shared.
Wow.
And my dad used to get up every year and say, look, don't mess with my family. You'll see a side of him. And I just, that meant a lot to me that she caught that. And I just defended them. And I'm going, you know what? I grew up building houses. I realized every pastor doesn't have something like that to fall back on. Mm-hmm. You had engineering even to fall back on if you needed to.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mess with my family. So anyway, yeah. I'm sorry.
I had the same thing when I,
me up.
Yeah, no, while you stirred, I did the same thing at the second church that I serve now. And I said, listen, my wife is off limits. She's my priority. My family's my priority. And no, she's not going to, she has gifts and skills and talents, but these are not to be exploited. I said, if there's ever a match between her and y'all going to always lose.
That's so good. So you're the first guy I've ever heard that said that
I
publicly declared my family's off limits because we were taught that's not the case.
Yeah.
And I we just celebrated 40 years of marriage, and I have 3 daughters that are all extremely successful in their fields that they're in, very confident ladies, and so I think they got that from their dad, and I think your kids got that from their dad too, It's just how it is, So anyway,
go ahead.
I would hang here forever. Listen, in fact, actually, I don't want to reveal it. I've got a very special surprise podcast we're going to do for the 200th podcast, and it has to do with me and my daughters. But I'll leave that alone. So, talk to us about what you're doing today with the Texas Baptist, specifically with all. You've got. I feel like you have like 3 focuses: rural, and then bivocational, and then multicultural. To kind of dive into that for us.
So all of it kind of interchanges. So I serve again as a director for Bi-Vocational Pastors Ministry, and my role or my mission of my particular team, my particular ministry, is to encourage, equip, and engage those who serve as bivocational pastors and those churches. A lot of those guys and ladies, they're out there doing multiple jobs. I know we got this thing now between bivocational and co-vocational.
Will you explain what co-vocational is? I don't know. I mean, I know bivocational.
I was getting ready to say, Dale, we'll do another podcast on that one, but that's okay. Okay, so here's the abstract. Here's the abstract. Here's the short version here. So as I understand it, so bivocational is what we've been called for centuries, right?
Forever.
Yeah, forever. You basically have 2 jobs. So it's a person who serves the church as well as works outside of the church to help meet those needs, to make sure that their household is taken care of. Okay. That's bivocational.
Okay.
Co-vocation, and it's done because the church is not able to carry the full financial load of that pastor and his household. So the pastor has a job outside. Co-vocational says, even if the church could fully fund me, and you will never hear me use the word full time. You hear me use the word fully funded. Sure, yeah. If the church could not fully fund my salary and benefits and all those things like that, I would still have an outside job. So I think the little nuances is this: co-vocational says, I'm doing it. I'm serving in 2 places because I want to be in the marketplace, and it's not because I have to.
Got you. So bivocational is need, co-vocational strategic.
It is. It could be. Now for me, I'm like this. I can just say, let's just make an addendum to bivocational. But I can call it intentional bivo. Yeah. But that's, so I'm like tomato.
Well, the reason this is important, we're doing a new conference this year. When we record this, I'm actually flying out tomorrow to Columbus, Ohio, to do one there, and it's called Soul Care Essentials. And we talk about your personal life, which is your private life, which is what's going inside your own heart, your personal life, which is your family relationships, that kind of thing. And we end up with the last session talking about your professional life. And one of the things we talk about is the fact that so many pastors already are bivocational or whatever the other vocationals are. But we really believe at 95 Network, and I think you probably see this too, that in the next 10 years, there's going to be more people who are bivocational, whatever it is, than who are quote unquote full-time. And we don't think that's bad necessarily. Well,
No, I think it's good.
I think you can take care of your family. It takes some stress. You actually lead better when your whole livelihood's not tied to that church. And so that's why I'm glad you kind of are diving into this, and it's the focus of what you do.
I did a video with two bivocational pastors at the end of last year. I recorded a video, and I'm going to get that information to you. Okay. And I talked with them, and we talked about being intentional. Mm-hmm. One of the guys was a barber. He's always been bivocational. Another guy is a law enforcement officer in the greater Dallas, the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth area. Mm-hmm. And he was fully funded at one point, but then he just couldn't, the church couldn't provide for his house. So he went, he said to me, he said, Ira, the burden that was taken off of me, the things that we can now do, mm-hmm. and so forth. He says, and then the ministry that I'm able to do outside, I'm connecting with these men and women who may not be believers, yep. or I'm in situations as a law enforcement officer that I can minister, even though I have to enforce the law. And I think you're right. It's happening. 95 Network is talking about the 95% of the churches mm-hmm. that run in this particular area. And I can assure you, I can assure you that a large majority of those or small membership churches, and they're bivocational. And if the pastor is not working outside of the church, a couple of things happen. Either he's a good retirement plan, or secondly, his wife is working outside of the home, mm-hmm. and she's able to carry that balance and that load. That's usually how those works. So if the spouse's work income and benefits go away, that guy has to go somewhere else.
Yep.
And so I said this to a group of leaders last month. I said, people are saying bivocational is trending. I said, no, it's trendy. Mm-hmm. It's always been there.
You're exactly right.
But now you're just saying it's, because we have some very important people around the country who pointing out bivocationalism and mm-hmm. so forth and so on. It's not trendy, or trending. It's trendy, because mm-hmm. I've been bivocational for the last 17 years.
I was. Yeah. Here's the thing, Ira. I didn't even remember that I was bivocational when I was pastoring, because I was working at a Christian radio station, but I did that because when the church hired me full time, they offered me $25,000 a year. And I got 3 daughters, and high school and middle school, I'm going, I can't live off that. And because I have grown up doing construction, and I will say this for bivocational pastors, and this is one of the difficulty things I think it was for me. I want to focus 100% of my energy on what I'm doing. And it's very hard to do that. If you're building houses all week, you want to get that house built, and I grew up doing that. So, you go from floors to walls to ceiling, roof. And so I always struggled of getting back into ministry mode. And then if I got into ministry mode, I didn't want to get back into carpentry mode. And I know that tension exists, but I'll tell you right now, this is just Dale's observation, but I have observed in my lifetime, and I've worked at full-time at multiple churches, I don't see very much interaction with lost people or people who aren't part of a church when the whole staff and the pastors and everyone is full-time. I just don't see any intentional effort. I see them telling their people to go reach the lost. But as you well know, leadership, you got to set the example. Have you seen that, or am I just, I'm just the exception?
So you are on point, man. You telling my story, because this is my second pastor. In my first pastor, as I said, I stepped away from engineering and I was on staff, and then some events happened, and I won't go into those mm-hmm. at this point, but I then became lead pastor. So I was in my walled office mm-hmm. and I had all my books around me mm-hmm. and I was studying, and I spent those hours getting ready and planning and praying and visualize and visioning and things like that. But you're right. I would bring lunch with me I'd heat up in the microwave. I'd sit in a break room, or I'd sit at a separate table and eat, and I'd go home. But that was about it. And then things got real tight at the church, financially speaking. So I had to go back into the secular field, if you would. So I dusted off my engineering skills and those things. And here's what happened. Every morning I'd wake up and I'd have to drive into downtown Houston and work.
That'll test your faith.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And get through traffic and do this. And it was eye-opening. And it reminded me why I was there. Let me tell you what happened. I believe my sermons improved because they could connect relationally. So when I heard someone says, Pastor, the traffic going into Houston, and you and I have driven through Houston together before, so
yes.
you know.
Well, we didn't. I wouldn't describe it as driving through. Crawling is the word.
Right.
We were together.
That's right. So I'm going in downtown, and so when someone says to me, Pastor, traffic was like this, or some word we don't want to use on the podcast, how they describing it, or I had an incident with this, or how about this? When I'm walking around downtown, going from my work building to lunch, and you see the homeless on the street.
They actually are real.
They are real. And you watch this, and you see folk who have money, but they're still broken. They're empty. That changed my sermon series changed, how my illustrations changed. And there was some contact. You get to sit next to, because if you go to the same restaurant twice a week, or at least weekly, they get to know you, you get to know them. And so what I do now is I go to this is a coffee shop in my neighborhood, and I go there intentionally so that I could hang out with those folks, get to know them, overhear conversations, especially with the staff, pray with them, listen to them struggle through these theological issues that they having, these young baristas, if you would. And I interject myself into them, and before you know, they go, I say, listen, I'll be praying for you. And now you get where you're going. And so when I say to people, let's go out, let's break the huddle. Let's get out of the huddle and let's get on the field, right?
Dude, my lifetime has been everybody just staying in the huddle.
Right.
It's like, and we want to get us, we're only supposed to, in football, you only have 11 people, but it's like, let's get as many people in the huddle as we can. And you never play the game,
But here's with that analogy. So the quarterback takes his players into the huddle, and he gives them the play. They talk about what's going on, where they're headed, and he goes, break. And the folks and these guys get on the line. What if the quarterback was to go stand back in the end zone? So that's what happens with some of us pastors. We call them to the huddle. We encourage them. That's okay, man. You fumble, but that's okay. That's okay. Look, here's our next play, and we look at our little chart. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this. Okay, and break. And you go to the line, and they're all ready to go. They're gonna go to the line, and then as a quarterback, you're standing somewhere off the side, and go, well, dude, you're not in the play. No, I just called the play.
No, I told you what to do.
Right. But when you get in the play,
we're meddling right now, by the way.
Yeah, but when you get in the play, I think it's different, man. So for me, I want to help encourage those guys. Like you said, how do I balance working as a construction worker, building houses, and also doing the Lord's work at the local church, and making sure I'm being faithful to my household and my family and my own private life and things of that nature. So I work with these churches, and because my church is in a rural context, I have even more. It's more of a granular focus, where small membership churches and bi-vocationally led churches, but in the rural context, is different. Pardon me, than in an urban setting.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to navigate and learn those worlds as well.
Well, just as I'm talking to you, I've actually had a revelation as we're just talking through this, because I talked about the tension that I felt about, I really wanted to put 100% of my effort either into the carpentry or home building when I was doing that. or even to the church. And it was always that tension. But I just realized on this podcast, I realized where that tension came from. And it was my unrealistic expectations of what ministry was, which is what led me to heart surgery and the book that I wrote and everything. But it was like, I'm like, oh, but if I could just be full time, because I always had this thing, I'm going to build this mega church one day, because that's what I've been called to do.
Right.
And obviously that didn't happen, but I realized, and so if you're listening now and I have that same tension, make sure you check what your expectations are, because ministry is not what you do at church. Ministry is your life. And I think back to as we talked earlier in the podcast, those gentlemen that they invested in you, 3 men, we don't even know where they are today, except for one of them, who invested in you, and you're sitting here today. And so I think we've got this misunderstanding of what ministry is. Before I run out of time, though, I would love for you just to dive into what your take is on what you're seeing in rural church ministry, and what are the obstacles? What are I mean, it's difficult right now doing rural.
Yeah. So, some of the things I'm seeing is, in some of the rural contexts, is you having some folks is aging. It's aging. Folks graduate high school, they go off to college, they never return. In some communities, there's no industries there, so there's nothing major that's going to keep them. And then those who do remain behind, trying to find. So you're going to find a higher. Sometimes you'll find higher unemployment, just depending on the area.
Sure.
You also finding, I think, with some churches, this challenge with shifting in technology. So in this, whatever it's to term now, since COVID, I don't want to.
I call it post-pandemic, but I don't say it's over.
Yeah, it's post-pandemic. That's right.
It's post-pandemic.
I love it. I'm gonna use that one. And post-pandemic, these churches in the rural context, first of all, they just wasn't ready for it. Right. I thank God that our church had a jump start. We had a camera, we had Wi-Fi already there. In the rural context, you don't always have broadband. So we had some things that we did, but some of them just didn't have it. And you had to figure out how to get that. So all these guys and ladies who were anti social media became social media preachers overnight.
You're right.
Or they're dying.
You're right.
And so what I'm seeing is that transition. And so how do you get there? And if you have an older congregation, the technology issues and how you met. So those are the things that are happening. I was on a meeting yesterday, and they said something about to the fact of the number of churches in North America that are closing every day.
It's fast. I mean, it's a lot.
Every week is going and going and going. And it's happening because the pandemic accelerated our death, right? Or our illness. It's just like, so now my good friend, Dr. Jonathan Smith, who's over our church revitalization team at Texas Baptist, he said what the pandemic did was it pushed us 5 years ahead. So if you thought you had 10 years before you were dead, now you got 5. So in 2 years, you went, it's like dog years. You just leaped.
I wrote an article about it, 7 years and 7 weeks. And basically in the 7 weeks from when we asked to close, we all had Easter as a distraction for those first 4 weeks. And then the 3 weeks after that, I watched everybody go into depression.
Yes.
And I basically said, hey, you got to where you were going in 7 weeks of where you would have been in 7 years. So he said 5, but that's same concept.
Close. Yeah.
Same concept.
So, absolutely.
Accelerated
5
things.
to 7, yeah. 5 to 7. And some of us are still, with the lights are still on, and we think we're alive, because the lights are still on, and because we have a cash reserve that helps us get there, or we don't have a high overhead and so forth and so on. But there is a challenge. And I think some of the challenge that I'm finding is, and with pastors, is paradigm shifting. It's changing our mindset, brother. There's a huge shift in how we do things. And we don't really get it all the time.
I'm seeing a tremendous resistance. What I've
Sure.
always said is when you don't know what to do, you go back to your default.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm seeing churches that had gotten online, were doing online, have just quit because they're meeting in person again. And again, most of us were not trained, no matter what our education is, to handle really real life church anyway. That's another story for another day. But specifically now, everything's changed. I believe we're in a reformation. I believe how we do church moving forward is being reformed before our eyes, and it ain't any fun being in the middle of a reformation. What do you see? I mean, I see pastors are just like just resistant to even think about changing.
Yeah, I think it very much is. It's getting out that comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
They're resisting the change. It's kind of like, look, I'm being forced to do it, so I'm gonna have to do it.
But I don't want to.
But I don't want to.
Yeah.
And then now that I don't have to do it per se, but here's the deal: you can resist it, but that doesn't mean it's going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Me denying that I'm sick doesn't make me be well.
Mm-mm.
You know, so I'm not going to claim I'm sick. You ain't got to claim you're sick. You're coughing. You got fever. Hey, buddy, you're sick.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing this and they're stopping. But here's the other side of it is, the other side of it, you talk about depression. We have a whole segment of our congregation and community are now dependent or accustomed. Let me use that word.
Yeah.
Accustomed to the virtual side.
Mm-hmm.
And I contemplated probably about 20 minutes of cutting a wire.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And I thought about it and I go,
no, keep
we're now reaching people across the globe with this.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to get more, I want to see people because I want the fellowship and here's the deal though, Dale. Here's what we have to come, we have to ask, and I had a group of pastors that I was talking to, and I asked, so why do you want people back in the church?
Good question.
Why do you want them? I asked that to some ministry, some praise and worship leaders. I said, why do you want them back in church? Because people just need me here. I said, no, here's why you want them. You want them back so you can perform in front of a live audience.
There you go. Boy, I knew we were going to go some places today, but there you go.
You want to perform in front of a live audience because for the guys, especially, let me just say, in my tradition, in case folks didn't recognize African-American Black. So in my tradition, the audience it gets you going.
It's key. Mm-hmm.
It's key. And I know some guys who literally went into a deeper depression. Not that the pandemic didn't give you a depression, right?
Yep.
Because I had depression fatigue. John Sanders and I talked about that last year, a couple of years ago. Just depression fatigue. And fatigue depression. And so what happens was you don't see those people. And something happens to your psyche.
Mm-hmm.
So watch this. So I got accustomed to preaching to 7 people because that's only the person that we allowed during the active part of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
They were essential folks that we had in the building to make sure things happen, right?
Yeah.
When it was able to let people back in, a friend of mine out of Little Rock, Arkansas said, Philip Pointer said to me, he says, I don't know if I want people back. I'm used to preaching to 6 or 7 people, essential. Having a crowd might scare me. And I understood what Philip was saying.
Yeah.
Because it's like now all of a sudden you got to go back to what? The performance. You hope that you don't.
Yeah.
But that's the reality. You got to guard against that. So that's across the board. But resistance is definitely something that's out there in all segments. And in the rural context, they're like, look, man, we don't have to pay for this high power internet anymore, or we don't have to worry about this and who's going to do this. So they're going to just keep going until
they die.
Till they die or something like that happens. Yeah.
I just saw a thing this past week on social media and it said this, and I think this will make this point. It said, people are asking questions today unlike any other time, but they're asking them online and they certainly aren't able to ask them in person. Our in-person way of doing church does not give people a chance to dialogue and ask questions. And again, I want to make sure before we wrap up, and we're out of time, but I want to make sure I say this. We're not saying that in-person is not important, but I think that the mentality we've got to adopt is a hybrid model to where we do the very best in person we can, and we do the very best online we can. And what I see is most pastors, they think online's optional, and it's not. If you're going to reach new people, it's not. And so I just encourage you today. I'll put in the show notes here just a link to we did a teaching about the hybrid church, and things have got to change. And look, these are two old men talking to y'all. Here's a 60 and a 57-year-old, you know.
Right.
We're telling you, we don't even understand it all. And again, there's just all we could talk for 3 hours about all this stuff. But as we wrap up the podcast today, and you think about where we are today, and you look at how things are today, what would you share if you were sitting down with one of our listeners and having a cup of coffee at your coffee shop? What's a word of hope or encouragement or advice or wisdom you would share with someone who just needs some direction today as we wrap up the podcast?
Yeah, I would say, it's kind of like, I'd say, make sure you. And this is a cliche, but I think it's on point. It's been said before, and we need to say it even more and more and more. Whatever you do, stay connected with the Father.
Mm-hmm. That's so good.
Because in these times, you're gonna need that connection in transitions. How the world is, we're more global. You have things going on, and it can become stressful. So stay connected with the Father, and be intentional about taking time alone or away with yourself and with your family. Mm-hmm. So let that go back to the priorities: God, family, or even God's self, and then family. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm not well, it's hard for me to lead my family well. Mm-hmm. So I would say to them, be intentional. And Dylan, you and I talked about this at length one time, just how you have to get away, have to disconnect. Mm-hmm. Mark chapter 6:31 says, come apart and rest a while. Get away. Be intentional with it. If the ministry dies because you left for a week, then
it needed to die.
It needed to die.
It was built on you.
It's built on you.
Yeah.
But I heard the scripture says, upon this rock I shall build my church. It's not mine anyway. It's his.
It's his.
That's
Man, thank you so much. You're so busy, and I appreciate you setting aside this time to be on here. I'm going to put in the show notes how to connect with Ira if you'd like to do that. He's got a few things he'll probably send me that we'll put links to. But Ira, thank you again. I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate our friendship. I mean, I feel like you're a friend of mine, and I just will do anything in the world to help you. I know this podcast is going to help a lot of folks. So thanks again for being here.
Blessings to you, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.